There are tomatoes that literally disappear in this story, but the real story is what those tomatoes symbolize for the story's narrator and his family. This is a sad story. It's one that's hard for the narrator to tell even now. But it is a story that will have a happy ending. The story starts with a seemingly random act of nature, a weed growing in a rocky crevice to the side of the narrator's driveway. Something about this weed looked different, so the narrator let it grow. It developed little yellow flowers, and then little green balls that turned into little red balls. The narrator then realized this was a tomato plant. With some hesitation, he tried one, and it was delicious. For the rest of the growing season, the narrator and his family enjoyed a free supply of tomatoes. The next spring, the narrator was pleased to see another tomato plant growing in the same rocky crevice, only this time there were multiple plants. This got the narrator thinking. He thought that if tomatoes can grow in such a seemingly inhospitable location with no care at all, then surely he could grow tomatoes of his own. Thus began the narrator's foray into vegetable gardening. The first step in his foray was to remove an old patio. With the help of his son, the narrator built a raised garden, and the project was a success. Whether it is told by the narrator or the narrator's spouse, the next part of the story will differ. The narrator's spouse will say that it was the narrator's obsessive tendencies that led him to build a second, much larger garden that far exceeded the needs of the family. The narrator, however, says that he realized the patio garden did not get ideal sunlight, and he simply wanted to utilize the growing potential of his yard. He does acknowledge that, perhaps, the side garden was a bit excessive. Nevertheless, both gardens were successful, and they grew at different rates, thus allowing the narrator and his family to enjoy a fresh supply of vegetables and herbs throughout the growing season. This brings us to the current growing season. The narrator decided to grow all of his plants from seed and to experiment with new tomato and cucumber varieties. So he planted the seeds, hardened off the young plants, transferred them to the gardens, and it was a success. Eventually, some of the tomatoes flowered and produced fruit, and he knew they would be ready to harvest in a couple of days. He came back in a couple of days, but saw no tomatoes ripe enough to harvest. The narrator was surprised, but he concluded he was just overly zealous and needed to give the plants more time. He saw several tomatoes that would surely be ready to harvest in the next couple of days. Those days passed, and the narrator was again surprised he had no tomatoes ripe enough to harvest. Furthermore, something was wrong with the cucumbers. The trellis system was sagging, and in some cases broken. Then the narrator saw a partially eaten tomato on the ground, and he knew what was going on. A stakeout of the garden confirmed his suspicion. The narrator was confused. He had never before had a problem with squirrels. He feels naive saying this now, but it wasn't until this point in the story that he even realized that squirrels could be a problem with vegetable gardens. So what was he doing differently this year versus years past? And then it hit him. He wasn't doing anything different. The issue was the absence of something in his yard this year versus years past. And the thing that was absent was his beloved dog, Vivy.
Vivy. Hi, good girl. This is our new camcorder and you're the very first video. La 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 la. Is Vivy licking your hand? You love Vivy, don't you?
After almost 15 incredible years with sweet Vivy, the narrator and his family said goodbye to her in February, just as the narrator was purchasing his seeds for this year's gardens. Aside from giving and receiving love to and from her family, the things that sustained Vivy were seagulls, cheese, and chasing squirrels. Unbeknownst to the narrator until now, Vivy had been an extremely effective squirrel deterrent all these years. The squirrels knew this was Vivy's yard, and they were best off not messing with her vegetables.
Viv, I'm videoing your butt. Sorry, Vibs. Oh, we should stop wagging. Vivy. Oh, there we go again. There we go. We got the tail wag back.
Sadly understanding the problem, the narrator came up with a plan. He declines to describe or show his methods on video, but suffice it to say, his plan deterred squirrels from going into his gardens. The narrator would also like to say that no squirrels were physically harmed. Emotionally harmed? Well, that he cannot guarantee. With his effective, albeit labor-intensive, squirrel deterrent method, the narrator and his family enjoyed fresh vegetables and herbs for the rest of the summer. But it just wasn't the same. Previously a source of enjoyment for the narrator, gardening seemed like a chore. Instead of planting a second round of cucumbers in July, the narrator just left the trellises bare. Vivy was always with him outside, and being in the garden alone just made the narrator sad. After Vivy died, life went on for the narrator and his family. One school year ended, another began. Baseball games were played, family trips were made, but life just wasn't the same. If you are a dog lover like the narrator and his family, then you know that not having a dog is like eating food, but without any seasoning or spice. Everything is just more enjoyable with a dog in your life.
Oh my gosh. Oh, I missed you so much.
So, after a very bland 8 months of being without a dog, the narrator and his family welcomed Louise into their lives. She's not much bigger than a squirrel right now, but she will surely become their formidable foe. The narrator is once again excited about gardening and is looking forward to growing excessive amounts of tomatoes for years to come.